Hello and welcome to Bonkers Economics. Am I bonkers or is it the system we live in? You decide. In this video we're asking how come we're so addicted to rising house prices and talking about the harm that addiction can do. Back in 2001 this house was on the Channel 4 programme Grand Designs, and this is what it looked like then, and that big yellow arrow you can see there shows roughly where I'm standing now. So you can see something of the huge amount of work we've put in those 20 years. And you might think that we're pretty chuffed to know that house prices have more or less tripled in that time. And that's in addition to all the work that we've done ourselves. But actually that's bonkers economics, because we have to think about our family. Our children are now grown up and they're beginning to have families of their own. Here's Henry, the latest arrival. And Henry's already put his thinking cap on. Here's Henry with his thinking cap on. And he's asking, I reckon he's asking, does he want house prices to go up or to go down in the next 25 years? We'll come back to Henry later in the video. For now, let's go back to the late 1970s, when I went off to university and the government paid students a grant of about £1,100 to cover their living expenses. Rent and books and travel and food and that sort of thing. Now a typical student rent then was about £300, so there was plenty left over for all those other needs that they had. Now as students know to their cost, the government doesn't pay a grant anymore, but if it did, then it would now be about £6,500, and the rent, if it had risen in line with inflation, would be about £2,000. So there'll still be plenty left over for all those essential things. But rents rise with house prices, not with general inflation. And house prices have risen much, much more than that in that time. In fact, they've risen so much that the rent that my son is actually paying at university today is in fact £6,500, which means that if the government did still pay a maintenance grant, it would be wiped out before he'd even bought his first can of beans. So what in practice have high house prices done to my family's finances? Well, not much to be frank, because they've left us £4,000 a year worse off in higher rents. And if that's bonkers, it's not the bonkerest thing we're going to encounter in this video. Because look what happens when young people leave home for good and want to set up in homes of their own. Well, for a start, they're sure to be paying bonkers rent for years to come. But suppose they do manage to scrape together the deposit on a mortgage on a small starter home. What's their attitude going to be then to rising house prices? Well, the clue is in that phrase, starter home. Because once families get onto the housing ladder, they're apt to want to move up it. And they're probably already eyeing up the larger home they'd like to have in a few years' time. Now let's suppose that that starter home costs £200,000 and the house they'd like to move to in a few years' time is £360,000. Well, that's £160,000 of extra borrowing if prices stay the same. But if prices rise by 25%, then that's £200,000 of extra borrowing that they'll need. But if prices fall by the same amount, then they'll only need £120,000 of additional borrowing, and that's £80,000 less that they'll have to find to move house. Now, to put that in real terms, that's £100 a week or thereabouts that they can spend or save. Given that's the case, how come we are so addicted to rising house prices? Well, the answer is they give us a feel-good buzz, even though they work against our rational self-interest. And let's face it, that is one definition of an addictive condition. After all, would you rather feel £100,000 richer, but actually be £100 a week worse off? Or would you rather feel £100,000 poorer, but actually be £100 a week better off in terms of what you can spend or save? And that's bearing in mind that the house you're living in is the same house. It doesn't change. Well, call me bonkers if you like, but I reckon that real money you can spend or save is much more useful than some sort of notional investment, the return on which you will probably never see in your lifetime. In fact, the only people who really benefit from higher house prices are the ones who live here and here. Because while we feel we're getting richer, these people actually are getting richer from all the extra interest and mortgage payments and fees that we pay them. Before we go on, let's just cover off some bases. Some people will cash in a large house, they'll buy a smaller one and they'll live off the proceeds. And some people will buy one or more houses as investments to rent out and they'll live off the proceeds of that. And yes, in these cases, they will probably be better off if house prices continue to rise. But most of us just want homes that we can afford. And we want homes that are affordable for our children and our grandchildren too, whether they're renting or buying houses. And higher house prices are never going to help with that. We've seen the effect of rising house prices on the rent that my son is paying at uni. And that effect is causing millions of people to pay bonkers rent for houses they can't possibly afford to buy. And we've seen the effect of rising house prices on families moving up the housing ladder, who would be potentially hundreds of pounds a week better off if house prices fell a bit rather than kept on rising. So now let's cycle back to where I'm standing in a house I've spent 20 years building. And let's go back to Henry, whom we last saw with his thinking cap on, wondering whether he wanted house prices to go up or down in the next 25 years or so. Well, Henry is probably hoping to inherit a small part of all this at that point to put down a deposit on his first home. So I'm pretty sure what he's worked out. If house prices fall, then yes, Henry will inherit less. But his first house will cost him less, his mortgage payments will be less, and he'll have more to spend on the good things in life. So for Henry, it's a no-brainer. If he wants a good life when he's grown up, he wants house prices to fall, not rise. And that means I want house prices to fall too, if I want Henry to have a great life. In fact, I've got no interest in the value of this place continuing to rise. And I would urge all parents and grandparents to think about that from their point of view too. The truth is that high house prices are making suckers of most of us. They're causing us to spend ridiculous sums on investments or so-called investments, a return on which we will probably never see in our lifetimes. And they're hoovering vast sums of money out of the economy that could be used for much, much more useful things. It's a huge problem, and the only solution the government can come up with is to encourage us to go on borrowing more and more money, so house prices keep on rising and the problem just gets worse. Now that really is bonkers, and it's particularly bonkers because there are lots of very simple and elegant solutions that could fix the problem. Those are for a different video. The chief takeaway from this one is that the property market is conning us out of our last brass farthing by persuading us to believe that we get richer the more of our money we throw their way. And if that's not bonkers, I really don't know what is.
Thank you.